Okay, 6b. 6b is asking us to outline what is meant by the internal resistance of the cell, and it's worth 2 marks. So the first thing is that you're going to have to define what the resistance is of, okay? And the exam sort of mark scheme is really clear. You cannot say resistance of cell. Okay, so what you've got to think about is actually what is it in the cell that's causing the resistance. So it would be the components, the chemicals, or the materials. So something along the lines of the resistance of the components of the cell. That's only 1 mark. What else do you need to say for this? Well, what does that resistance do? What's the implications of it? Well, it leads to an energy or power loss within the cell itself. Okay, and that would be your 2nd mark there. For part 2, we're determining the internal resistance of the cell. And a lot of people started trying to use the wrong equation for this one. So always, if you're never sure, start with what you already know and what you've been given. So we know we've got the graph on the previous page, but I also know that when the resistance is equal to 0.8 ohms, the current is 0.7 amps. Okay, but again, this time I'm looking at internal resistance of the cell. So if I go back to my previous page, I can use those things already. So when I know that R is at 0.8, I've got a current of 0.7. And I can read off, and again, I'm looking at dissipated in the cell because I'm looking at the internal resistance, that when it's at 0.8 ohms, it comes off to about 0.58 watts. So at this stage, I'm just going to write down again things that I know. So P of power is 0.58 watts, and our I is equal to 0.7 amps. Again, from here, I'm working out the internal resistance, so I'm going to be using P is equal to I squared little r, because we're looking again at the cell. Simply sub in what I know, so 0.58 is equal to 0.7 squared r, and we then rearrange for r, so 0.58 divided by 0.7 squared to give us 1.18, which is 1.2 to 2 significant figures ohms. Okay, that was one way in which you could do this. The other way that you could have done, which a lot of people did, is you went back to this graph and you looked where the power equals. So the power dissipated in the resistor and the power dissipated in the cell were equal. So you could sort of say when the powers were equal, or even sort of P is equal to I squared R is equal to I squared little r. And then that came off reading from the graph. Again, if we look at our graph here, we can see that they come off at around about 1.25 ohms. Okay, so 1.25